Well, thank you very much. Let me thank the media for coming. You would have heard the speaker's ruling. We heard it too. We expected differently. We made very strong arguments yesterday, led by our Attorney General, strongly supported by our Minister of Finance. But we want to get on with the business of our country. We want to get the budget. We want to have a budget in place for 2013, and we are proceeding with the estimates. I think that we would start by asking the Attorney General to speak to us. But let me say this before I hand over to him. I want to restate our position that our budget came at the end of, at a point in our continuous reflection of where Guyana is and what are the next steps our country requires to keep on growing. As we pointed out, we've had 7 consecutive years of growth and development, and our budget, every allocation in our budget is based on considered judgment as to what is required to keep our country growing and developing. Maybe let me ask our Attorney General first to speak to the legal considerations.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, ladies and gentlemen of the press. We have heard the Speaker's ruling, and I am fortified in my belief that there is a serious conceptual difficulty in understanding the constitutionally defined role of the National Assembly having regard to its functions and responsibility. You have the unfortunate position here where a court has ruled, and in our system, under our Constitution, the court is the final arbiter of matters of law and in terms of interpreting the Constitution. That institution has ruled. Though it is argued that it is not a final ruling, in my humble view, that does not, in any form or fashion, cause that ruling to lose its efficacy. So on the one hand, we have the court ruling in a particular manner, specifically to say that in accordance with the Constitution of Guyana, the National Assembly has no power to cut. That institution called the judiciary under our constitutional construct is the final arbiter on what the Constitution says and what the Constitution means. On the other hand, you have the legislature, the National Assembly, though the court has so pronounced, and in the face of such a pronouncement, has proceeded to pronounce that it has the power to cut. So you have now a situation of complete and utter confusion, because you have the Parliament saying that it has the power to cut under the Constitution, and the court, which is the guardian of that Constitution, saying that the Parliament doesn't have any such power. And that is the conundrum that we find ourselves in. The situation, I suspect, will be compounded further if the Chief Justice is to rule finally on this matter. And I have written to him, to His Honor, indicating the desirability that there should be final pronouncements on this matter. I cannot conceive how the Chief Justice can depart from the pronouncements he has made in his preliminary ruling, because after all, those pronouncements relate simply to construing and interpreting provisions of the Constitution. Those provisions have not changed from the time he has interpreted them to now. So there is a strong likelihood that we will have a pronouncement now from the court, finally, that will be in collision with the pronouncements made by the Speaker. So as Attorney General, I find myself in some great difficulty, in fact, in advising the government which one of these institutions' pronouncements we should follow. Should we follow the Parliament, the Speaker ruling? Should we follow the court? Now, there, on a regular basis, the court makes pronouncements against the executive regularly. Can the executive take the position that we are not going to be bound by the court? And when it concerns the Constitution, we in the executive can decide that we will interpret the Constitution and we will be the final arbiter on what the Constitution says or not, irrespective of the court's ruling. I say that to you to demonstrate to you the precipice upon which we are now precariously perched as a nation, as a government, and as a country. And this is the difficulties that we have to fashion a way forward in terms of reconciling. Those are my preliminary observations for the time being. Of course, as we go on, I can expand upon them or deal with other issues as you may think fit.
May I invite the Minister of Finance?
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. As you have said and as the Attorney General has said, we find ourselves as a Parliament in Guyana at an extremely important juncture, and as the Attorney General said, in a particularly precarious position. What we have essentially before us is an issue that has been the subject of considerable debate in this House, but more importantly, benefited from formal scrutiny in the courts of law. It is particularly significant to note, if one listened to the arguments offered by the opposition yesterday, that all of the constitutional articles and other premises on which they base their arguments none of them are novel. They were all, in fact, articles and other bases that were presented to the court when this matter engaged the attention of the court. And all of them were addressed, whether it's Article 218, whether it's Article 171, they were all offered in the courts, subject to scrutiny by the courts, and reflected in the formal decision of the court. There were no novel arguments presented by the opposition last night. No arguments were proffered that had not previously been subject to judicial scrutiny and pronouncement. That's significant to know. That fact notwithstanding, and notwithstanding that the speakers on the government side on this matter last night presented such cogent and compelling arguments, including but not confined to reliance on the Chief Justice's ruling, we were and are extremely surprised today to receive a decision handed down by the Speaker that essentially collides with the decision previously delivered by the Chief Justice on this matter. This is best described as an extremely precarious position, because, like the Attorney General said, you have now two conflicting positions articulated by two different authorities. One would conventionally and normally think that the court would be the competent authority for pronouncing on this matter, and this is the government's position, that we would be and are guided by the court's ruling in this matter, as indeed we are guided by all decisions of the court. Suffice it to say that we are confronted now with this conundrum. Let me say that on top of that, you have the reality that if one were to scrutinize the cuts that are being proposed, and it is significant to note that cuts have not been proposed by the APNU, to the best of my knowledge, no cuts have been proposed by the APNU. Cuts have been proposed by the AFC, extensive cuts, and I think these have received considerable public reportage. It is significant to note that if you examine the list of cuts being proposed by the AFC, in which presumably Mr. Amjatan will now be moving in the House, you would see that in fact the proposed cuts are without merit and go in many instances to the core of important developmental projects in our country. And that is an entirely different matter, but an equally important one. Because one would shudder to think that this authority, which the National Assembly is now vesting itself with, in defiance of the court's ruling, could now potentially be used to effect cuts that in fact will hinder and harm the development of our country. If you look at the list of cuts, important developmental projects, whether it's infrastructural projects, and Minister Ben no doubt will elaborate on this matter, several very important infrastructural projects, several very important social projects, including hospitals, in particular the specialty hospital, which incidentally and significantly this House actually approved last year. Employment cost allocations, which pay ordinary Guyanese workers, ordinary Guyanese men and women going to work every day. And the list goes on. If you scrutinize the list, the list of proposed cuts speaks for itself. So we now have the double alarm that this authority, like I said, that the National Assembly has vested itself with, has clothed itself with, can now potentially be used to effect this abuse on the developmental process. And that itself is the source of compounded alarm. I remain hopeful, Prime Minister, ladies and gentlemen of the media, that members of the National Assembly on that side of the House will, in their conscience, vote on the merit of the allocations presented before them. We have always said we have absolutely no difficulty answering any question they may have. We have absolutely no difficulty providing any detail they may request. I hope that they avail themselves of the Committee of Supply process to ask as many questions as they wish, to listen to the answers supplied and receive the documentation shared with them where they request documentation, and ultimately vote for the development of Guyana, which would mean a vote for the budget as presented before this National Assembly. I'm still hopeful that those votes will be used responsibly and in this manner. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Minister Ashley Singh, the list of proposed cuts, I think, have been available to the media, and I guess they would have had some time to look at it. I don't know if Minister Ben would want to speak to them before, or we should wait.
Well,
Questions
yes,
on them?
Prime Minister. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, first off, like my other colleagues, I anticipated perhaps against hope that the decision from the Speaker's chair would have been different. We believe, of course, that the budget is a carefully crafted one. As was intimated before, we've had 7 years, year-on-year growth. And in spite of great difficulties, confusion last year too, we were able to manage to continue the growth in the economy of our country and the expansion of it. The Speaker did say towards the end of his ruling about the government sinking or living or dying by its budget. And that is what we wanted to do, because it's our budget. We anticipate that we should live or die by our budget, or then we'll have to go back to the electorate, which is the normal thing. But here it is, a budget based on the proposals offered by the AFC and the opposition generally, takes a different shape, form, and character. And in many aspects. And as Minister Ashley Singh just pointed out, will that pay attention to the major infrastructural initiatives which are necessary to maintain the momentum of development of our country? I could speak to generally in terms of the cuts to the attack again to the brain of the government, the attacks on the office of the president in terms of the proposed reductions. A large sweep of reductions proposed at the office of the president and at the Ministry of Finance and other ministries generally. But also particularly to in my ministry, say for our work services group, contracted employees, the proposal is for the removal of $356 million, which is 85% of the monies required to run what is the engineering brain for infrastructure for the country in terms of civil and civil works, roads and bridges and all the design support and issues. So right away, in terms of our ministry, there's an attack on the technical competence, technical and professional competence of the ministry, 85% removal. In respect of certain development projects where we've had extensive public discussion, particularly in the print media, we have a removal of 540 million, some 43% too, of the highway improvement of the East Bank of Demerara. Projects which are on the way. I don't know if we are expected to stop in midstream and abandon the works. The public is well aware from the discussions, information to be provided that the increase in traffic, the congestion, particularly in the East Bank, relates generally to an increase of 10,000 new vehicles in our country every year. And the reason the designs and these projects are going into place is to take care of the increased demand and to improve safety with respect to the traveling public. For the Amila Falls Access Road, $1 billion removed, proposed, and again here it is a critical infrastructure project and one which is supposed to have synergistic relations to the rest of the economy in terms of not simply the road, the power lines and the multiply effect it has throughout the country. Here it is, this project is imperiled by the removal of over 40% of the amounts estimated to be used this year. This one is actually strange in some ways because last year there was a voted provision which was approved, not contested in the Parliament with respect to the Amila Falls Access Road. But here it is this year we have a significant reduction which imperils the project. But now the one which is really the gremlin in all of it, the CGIA modernization project, where also too we had voted provisions for last year with respect to the initial sums to be provided. 5.3 billion were proposed. The AFC proposes to remove all of it. There has been extensive discussion. There have been presentations made as to why this project is important. And here it is, this important developmental project to maintain the economic and cultural and social sustainability of our economy and people. Here it is, there's a proposal, and we know what the issues are. The issues are insufficient capacity for the building, short runway, improvements in the total ambience and environment for the airport, and making the environment safe too in the final result. Here it is, one of the critical developmental projects for our country over the next 2-3 years, along with the Amila Falls Road. Here it is that they're proposing to remove all of the amounts with respect to that project. And the list goes on with the other ministries, of course the Ministry of Home Affairs, the Ministry of Health, we heard about the Specialty Project Hospital, the removal of all the sums again. One wonders where this would all end, where in fact lies perhaps an intention to cripple the development trust, cripple our economy, and to make life and living in our country unsustainability with the necessary or the understandable results for our people. And so that's my first take on the matter in terms of the cuts proposed.
Thank you very much, Minister Ben. May I ask Minister Edgell, may I invite Minister Edgell for his comment?
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, I would want to take a different angle. I would want to express publicly some questions that are lingering in my mind. I'm certain that the people of Guyana would want answers to these questions. The first question that is lingering in my mind is that the opposition, all 14 lawyers that are known publicly in the opposition, were in possession of the Chief Justice's ruling since July last year. There is a structure in which matters, if you don't believe it is correct, can be appealed. There's the full court, there's the appellate court, there's the CCJ, you could go all the way to Trinidad. The question that must be answered is why over the last 9 months, no member of the opposition chose to use the court of law, which is the final arbiter as it relates to matters of law and the Constitution, to have this matter dealt with. It is clear. This is plain politics. You choose the place where you know you can win because you have the majority of one. In the court of law, what stands up there is not majoritarianism, is your arguments, the basis of your argument. What is law, what is factual, and what could be substantiated based upon precedent. So they did not choose that. Number two, we have proposed cuts, and I would like to call these cuts ill-conceived. Ill-conceived. These are ill-conceived cuts. For example, here it is, we have an opposition that is saying to the government, you need to do more for young people. One of the tools that we've been using to empower young people, to make them employable, is the Board of Industrial Training. And in these proposed cuts, $224 million allocated to the Ministry of Human Services and Social Security for the Board of Industrial Training is being cut to zero. I think this is the way we would like to honor the memory of the late Dr. Dale Bisnott, who headed that board just before his demise. This is the way you like. But this is what you're doing for young people. Where we need more heavy-duty operators, where we need more semi-skilled people, where the government was being battered about why we bring in the Chinese to work on the Marriott if we don't have the skills available, where we are seeking to make more people skilled and available for work, you are cutting the money. The other question that is lingering in my mind, and I think the people of Guyana needs answers to this, especially from the person who's moving the motion, is who should we follow? We heard arguments in the House last night that the Chief Justice has a ruling, a 34-page ruling. It's been in the public space. We all know what it was said. And now we have a new ruling from the Speaker. In the separation of powers, the layman's understanding is that there are three arms of government: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. Should the executive behave in a similar manner like the legislative, we are heading for anarchy in the country, because we hear you saying, the legislative saying the courts can't dictate for us. Should the executive take that same position, what will happen in the country? In any normal society, there needs to be respect for the rule of law. And this is a mantra that has been sung several times by our friends on the opposite side of the House. And now that they have an opportunity to demonstrate in a responsible way that they are prepared to follow the rule of law, they have chosen a different path. Colleagues, the other thing that I believe is of great concern is that the Honorable Minister Ben indicated, why would you approve allocations last year where monies would have been expended on projects, and this year for the continuation of projects? Because you don't approve all the money in a given year for a particular project if that project will go over several years. The Amalda Falls is not something that could be built in 1 year. So when you vote a provision this year, it means it's sum total. It's over several years. You have the road, then we have to do other things. We have to attract inflows. If you voted for it last year and you supported it, If there are questions, if there are concerns about the expenditure, the Committee of Supply is the place where those questions are answered. But you are proposing cuts even before you have the answers to the questions. The same thing with the pumps for drainage and irrigation. When our country is at a record high in the production of rice, and drainage and irrigation is essential to ensure proper agricultural development. When in Budget 2013, as presented by the Honorable Minister Ashley Singh, 5,005 acres of land is to be opened at Aurora on Region 2 for the expansion of agriculture. Why would you be cutting the $814 million for the pumps to ensure that there's drainage and irrigation when everybody in this country understands that we just cannot depend upon the sluices alone because of our own weather patterns, what happens in the high tide when there's excessive rainfall and we can't open it. Pumps are important. And this is money that is funded from India, an arrangement the government of Guyana with India. So I would want to say this is ill-conceived. I said Saturday in another program that in my humble view, and I don't want to be confrontational, I see this as political blackmail. I see this as political blackmail. I don't see this being something that is reasonable. Last year, we described these cuts as being reckless, vindictive, and with being done with vengeance. I would want to implore the opposition that we not be fueled by hate, and we must change from the culture of if the government looks bad, we look good. Because this is no longer about government looking bad or opposition looking good. This is about benefits for the people of Guyana. I believe every Guyanese, wherever I've gone over the last several days in consultations and talking with people, they have praised the budget measures, and they would like to see Budget 2013 being implemented for the good and development of all Guyanese. We need to stop the infantile political behavior that we are seeing here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. I think I had addressed in a letter to the editors the issues, the proposed cuts in electricity. I'll mention that in there, they propose to cut the allocations, which are foreign funded flows from the Exim Bank of China for the transmission upgrade that is in process and should be completed by the end of the year, and also some flows, some project between GPL and IDB, which seeks to address issues of losses, in particular to put in hardened circuits in some places so as to make it more difficult for people to steal electricity, and some other institutional strengthening that would be related to that. So I think it's time maybe we open for questions from the media, and I so do.
Sir, in your opening statements, you mentioned that the budget is crafted out following considered judgment, and Minister, you would have mentioned that the budget is also crafted in the circumstances, and as such, this is the best formula proposed. Minister, you would have also said that the government would be guided by the ruling of the court. So I'm wondering, in that context, why still go ahead with the Committee of Supply as against moving it into an appeal court or a Court of Justice?
Well, I think that we need to have a budget. There are some other, I think, provisions in the Constitution that would require that a budget be in place by the end of this month, and so we do need that. I would agree with you, yes, we have to weigh up different things, and in our weighing up, we need to proceed to have a budget in place by the end of April, whilst other steps are contemplated.
The AG, Michael Young, Guyana Times. Could you say what stopped you before the speaker's ruling today from approaching the courts as you have done now, asking for finality with respect to the ruling? And given the fact that you said last night during the debates that the preliminary decision was binding, it is clear that it's not, because the speaker says that they will set the rules for the proceedings. What then is the way forward in the matrix?
When persons decide, arrogate unto themselves the power to determine that court ruling is not binding, well, then we are moving towards that state of anarchy that I speak about. The majesty of the courts depends upon the tacit recognition of that majesty by the citizenry. If tomorrow the entire country is to take the position that the parliament has taken, then we have no law and order in this country. It's as simple as that. As I indicated, I wrote to the Chief Justice, informing him of the fact that this issue of impending budget cuts, as they were at the time, is a live one again in the Parliament, and therefore it has become highly desirable that we resume the matter for the purposes of him hearing further arguments if he decides that he requires that, but ultimately for there to be a final ruling in the matter. I haven't received a response from that.
I'll follow up. Could you say when the letter was written to the Chief Justice, and could you say what prohibited you before? Because obviously the issue of budget cuts could have not been one contemplated in January or December, because the opposition's position throughout the entire last year has been that they will inflict cuts and that they have the responsibility or the authority within the National Assembly to do so. And given the fact that he has not responded now, could you say when you anticipate that he will file this response, given the urgency of the matter and the fact that we're...
Well, I did impress upon him the urgency of the matter in my letter. I cannot dictate the pace at which the judicial system works. It's a highly independent body. All I can do in any given circumstances is to advert attention to the urgency of the issue at hand. But what is significant is that those who felt aggrieved by that ruling ought to have used the processes which are available to challenge that ruling. Because I go back to the position of the ordinary man, and in the eyes of the law, the rule of law means that all is equal before the law. That is a fundamental concept inherent in the doctrine called the rule of law. Therefore, the Parliament is no different from the ordinary citizen of the country. And the same rule or rules that apply to the ordinary man applies to the Parliament. And in the same fashion that we in the Parliament expects the ordinary man to behave in relation to the court's ruling, the ordinary man expects the Parliament to behave that way too. When the Parliament passes laws, the Parliament passes those laws with the expectation that the citizenry will accept the will of the Parliament and obey those laws. If tomorrow the citizens of this country decide to take the example set by the Parliament and disregard laws passed by the Parliament, then we are heading down the highway of anarchy. Hence my original statement that this ruling has placed us on the edge of a precipice, and it is going to be compounded further if my prediction holds that the Chief Justice's preliminary ruling will be confirmed in every material way by a final ruling.
And
What?
Let's say
Could we have this gentleman there?
Colin.
What further actions do you plan with regard to the actions or reactions with regard to this ruling you heard today? And secondly, are you not comforted by the fact that Mr. Ramjatan said yesterday there could be no cuts depending on the answers you give to this question?
It is not a matter of cuts or no cuts. It is acting beyond powers that you have.
So when you go around with the debate then?
Sorry?
Why are you continuing with the charade then upstairs?
Because the Constitution mandates a budget to be presented within a constitutionally prescribed time. So we are doing that as we did in 2012, and then we take it from there. But the country cannot come to a halt, or the government cannot bring the nation's business to a halt as a result of the irrationality of a majority in the National Assembly. Or else we will be succumbing to that irrationality.
If I may add to it, it is our duty as a government and as a responsible government to exhaust every avenue available to us to secure passage of the budget. Those avenues include consideration of the estimates tabled by us in the Committee of Supply, and we will exhaust that avenue. This is our duty. It is equally important that we make the statement and demonstrate our commitment to that statement, that we have absolutely no difficulty subjecting the estimates to the ultimate degree of scrutiny, and we have absolutely no difficulty answering any questions posed. And we will honor that commitment.
Just a point.
That gentleman wanted to speak.
You've said, and I think I can agree with you, it's unlikely that the Chief Justice is going to change his position. Let's say that his final ruling comes before next week, Tuesday, when the approbation is in, like you said, or after. What then?
Well, I suppose we would have to, these things, as Attorney General, I find myself in an extremely difficult position, because I am now serving two masters, one right and one wrong, but one is in charge of one forum.
Right,
So as wrong as I believe it is here, I am not sure on how to advise the government forward. My original advice, my advice can be easily disregard everything that the Parliament is doing. But as the Honourable Minister of Finance explained, by doing that, by taking a strict legal position, I can expose the nation to untold damages. Because the nation's business will come to a halt without these expenditures, these estimates being approved, in however form they are approved. So it is not an easy situation, hence my description of it as a conundrum.
I think the elephant in the room, sir, is the issue of elections. Is the government prepared to go to elections to defend that legal principle and leave the court as final arbiter?
Our first position is to ensure that we comply with all the procedure, with the laws of the land, of course, the Constitution, and we discharge responsibilities that devolve upon us as a government under the laws and under the Constitution. Those include, among them, the presentation of a national budget for the country. If we are prevented from so doing, and election is the only alternative to which we can resort, other than by destruction of the national interest, then I presume rather, that our choices would have been extremely confined to that one option.
But I think by your question, you're actually admitting that it's a view that this is a carefully orchestrated, strategically planned, manufactured controversy to bring about the desired end. I mean, the question presents there a thinking of that order.
How do you react comment that all of this could have been avoided easily.
Let me just say before you go that the question of elections going to the electorate again was just raised. But let me point out that there are at least 10 line items here where the Guyana Elections Commission's budgetary proposals from the government are cut severely, some completely.
So you hear that, Francis?
And one wonders, when we get to the details, what shape the Guyana Elections Commission would be in to, in fact, run any elections given these proposals, what will turn out from the Committee of Supply. So that is something we have to look to as we go along too.
I was wondering, but AG, I was taking your argument to the logical extension. You're saying that the preliminary ruling is binding on both sides, or whatever, given the fact that the Speaker ruled and the courts ruled. If that ruling is binding and the opposition in Parliament, along with the Speaker, say that they will not abide by that ruling, doesn't it mean that they're in contempt of court? And then you can move on the fact that it's binding at that level to seek to get some remedies in the meantime while the Parliament is still proceeding. I'm trying to understand.
The court did not issue what is called coercive orders. In fact, out of respect, and I mentioned that in my presentation, out of comity, the court declined to make any coercive orders, and the court sought to give guidance, expecting, of course, that the National Assembly, being a high institution of the Constitution, would comply, or rather accept those, or that guidance. Unfortunately, that turned out to be a false expectation on the part of the court.
Okay, any other questions?
Yes, Mr. Attorney General, are you saying then that there would be, at this point in time, that you can take off a fresh move to the court, but you're going to wait on the Chief Justice's final ruling?
The issue, this court is already seized of the issue. But that, of course, does not mean that I cannot bring challenge afresh. The option will have to be discussed and decided upon collectively by Cabinet, of course. But both options are open. The option to file fresh proceedings, because this is a new ruling, and this has taken the matter even further, because here the Speaker has rejected the jurisdiction of the court to review the proceedings of Parliament, though I cited cases from right across the Commonwealth world, all of them showing the court's undoubted right, duty, and constitutional obligation to review not only Parliament, but every institutions operating under constitutional structure, to ensure that they do not act outside of their constitutional mandate. This Speaker has said that the court has no such power over him. Very, very bizarre state of affairs.
Just two questions I have. Different members on the panel are speaking about a one-seat majority and about the dictatorship in Parliament. Are you here attacking the opposition for this decision of the Speaker, or are you attacking the decision of the Speaker himself?
It's not a question of attacking. I don't like the word attack. I am offering my views, critical as they are, on the rulings of the Speaker. I don't regard my expression of those views as an attack. Of course, I have the greatest of regard for the office of the Speaker, and I will not attack the Speaker. I am expressing my frank professional views as legal advisor of the government on legal issues raised by the Speaker in his ruling. And certainly I am entitled to do so.
Okay. And the final thing, Minister Ben, you spoke about the cuts proposed by the AFC on the Amina Falls Road project. In statements you made Saturday or Sunday, you said that the plane that crashed was conducting reconnaissance of Amina Falls area to determine where the road would finally go. Could you explain that, sir, when contracts have already been issued for that road?
The plane was doing a LiDAR survey intended to optimize the final section of Section 7. Final, that's the last section going up to the falls. And also, the more important issue which it came in for was to do the alignment for the power lines. The power line alignment has to be identified and optimized, mapped out. And so the aerial survey, most of the work was related to the power line survey, the power line routing.
But the road and the power line routing,
I think-
they be on the
I
same?
think-
They're not the same.
But I think the important word here is optimizing. Certainly,
Exactly.
a route has been laid, and then with more information, that route may be adjusted some in vertical and horizontal positioning, and this is the way that roads are normally put in. You start with a livable layout, and you put more money in, and you do more studies, and you get something that you think is close to the best.
We have a final question.
Prime Minister, the negotiations at Office of the President that are taking place with the EPNU, could we say that those are negotiations on the part of the EPNU, UFC and government with respect to resolving the gridlock around the budget, or is it just continued grandstanding?
I would say that I think it is discussions that speak to or seek to find improved relations in general, and certainly if there are good feelings on all parties' side, it would help with it could help with the budget. That would be my.
One question. Minister saying, Dr. saying, 2 years now, 2 successive years, we've had issues concerning the budget. Do you think it's time to establish a more formal mechanism for not necessarily budget passing to the opposition, but a more consultative process?
Let me say,
Beyond what is already in the
well, let me say that we already have a very extensive consultation process. That Budget 2013, in fact, benefited from this process, including input from a number of stakeholders. You would recall, in fact, that you would recall, for example, that the private sector themselves came out publicly and expressed their satisfaction that a number of their suggestions were in fact considered and included in the budget. Similar pronouncements have been made by organized labor. And as I pointed out in this National Assembly, a number of the initiatives included in the budget are in fact initiatives that have at one time or another been advocated by the opposition themselves. In addition, of course, we were engaged in a series of pre-budget meetings, which, as you know, and which is now a matter of public record, which meetings were abandoned by the opposition some weeks before the budget. The government remains committed to speaking with every stakeholder in Guyana, including the parliamentary opposition, on all matters of national importance.